Peter came and said to Jesus, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him, and as he could not pay, his Lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him and saying, 'Have patience with me, and I'll pay you everything.' And out of pity for him, the Lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him by the throat, he said, 'Pay what you owe.' Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you.' But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what has happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their Lord all that had taken place. Then his Lord summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you?' And in anger, his Lord handed him over to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our salvation. Amen. Please be seated. Today's gospel is relatively straightforward. In it, Jesus invites us to be gracious with one another and to forgive one another. And presumably, he invites us also to be gracious with ourselves and to forgive ourselves. And if every one of us put into practice what Jesus teaches us, if every one of us followed Jesus in just those 2 things, being gracious with one another, forgiving one another, and perhaps even more importantly, being gracious with ourselves and forgiving ourselves, then there'd be no need to preach this sermon. But that is not the world in which we live. We are not always gracious with each other, and in fact seem to be increasingly unkind. And Lord knows we are not at all gracious with ourselves, and are perhaps slowest to forgive ourselves of all. And so this sermon does become a necessity. We're in our 3rd sermon in a 4-part series. Next week we'll wrap that up. And our topic today is let's talk about suicide. I do want to commend you for being here. This is a tough subject. It's a hard sermon to preach. I know it's a hard sermon to listen to. And so I do commend you for your courage in being here. And if you need to cry, crying's not a bad thing. I don't know why we are ashamed and embarrassed about crying. If you need to lean into the person next to you a little bit, even if that person is a stranger, do so. Take a hand, whatever. It's tough. I've been preaching about 40 years, first as a youth minister, then as a seminarian, actually first as a college chaplain, then as a youth minister, then as a seminarian, finally as a priest. And in all those 40 years, I've never had a sermon where so many people have talked to me before the sermon as after the sermon. Lots of people always talk to me after sermons, and I always enjoy that. But with this one, as soon as people learned what I was talking about, it's just been a steady stream of people. And can you guess what they've said? They've said 2 things. Somebody I know committed suicide, a husband, a wife, a child, a good friend. And to this day, it still haunts me. I don't know how you get over that. And the simple truth is you don't. And then the other thing people say, and again, you can guess this, is they say, please don't use my name, but you can tell my story. I tried to commit suicide, and then they tell me their story. And I can't tell their story because too many people have told me their story. We just don't have time. It's a mature woman, a very bright lady, doing very well at life at this point, but she says, when I was 19, life was just so painful, so I tried twice. It's the middle-aged man who says, sat in my car in the garage door shut, and in my hand I had a glass of bourbon, And on the CD player, I had my favorite CD. And at the last minute, I just couldn't quite go through with it, but I think about it every day. And even though this person is well-established, very smart, successful in life, he says, my number one goal, and in some ways my only goal, I'll be a success if I can just get to the end of my life. It's the young mother, married, kids, very happy, life of the party sort of person that said, you know, when I was a teenager, my life was just filled with so much pain. And I just thought it was all my fault. And I just wanted to figure out a way to make it go away. It's the teenagers, some of whom I visited in the hospital after they've tried. So they know I know their story. And others are ones who I didn't know their story. But they say, my parents don't want anybody to know, so please don't use my name, but you can tell my story. And just on and on and on. And the statistics bear that out. So, and the statistics are stunning. 2012, more than 800,000 people committed suicide. That's more than died from crimes and wars. 100 people died from wars, 120,500 from crime. Now they figure that's 1 million. You know, that now 1 million people, 1 million plus commit suicide every year. It's a figure that continues to rise. You know that baby boomers kill themselves at an unprecedented rate because our great enterprise in life fails, and that's the simple truth. And so, what you don't always hear is that every other age group, every other cohort below that is killing themselves at an equal or greater rate than ours. And so they expect that rate to continue to go up exponentially. United States, twice as many people die from suicide as homicide. And bringing it right home, Loudoun County, sharp rise in teen suicides over the past 2 years. In 2015, just one reported teenage suicide. 2016, 5. And so far, 2017, 3. And if that doesn't keep you up at night, I don't know what will. Because none of those parents thought their kids were going to be the ones to do it. But their kids did. So let's bring it home to the United States, and we'll see some of the reasons why this is the case in Loudoun County. We live in a lot of high-risk factors. Hopefully you'll understand a little bit more about that by the time we're done. So next slide, please. And here's just some national statistics. United States, that was global, now national. Someone dies by suicide every 12 minutes in the U.S., third leading cause of death. You can read that. And then I did a lot of studying for this. I've taken a couple courses over the years and then some independent study, but I studied for this particular sermon and updated my knowledge, and something I learned was that last figure. You've all heard that middle-aged white men are a huge risk, and our suicide rates have just gone through this exponentially through the roof, and they have. But look at the last one. Suicide for women ages 45 to 64 rose by 63% from 1999 to 2014, last year, for which you have statistics. That's the highest rise of all the rises. So, and we often think of teenagers. But in fact, the number one group, the highest rate of suicide is in the elderly. Makes sense, doesn't it? But middle-aged people, men and women, have the rates that are escalating the fastest. Just a couple summary statements about that, ways just to summarize those statistics. Looking at the 10 leading causes of death in America, there's been a promising trend. The death rates of the big ones, heart disease, cancer, stroke, and diabetes, are all going down. But there's one big exception: suicide. It's going up. Every year since 1999, more Americans killed themselves than the year before, doubled every year up to 2008 or 2009, then it increased by 4 every year after that, up to the current year, making suicide the nation's greatest untamed cause of death. In much of the world, it's among the only major threat to get significantly worse in the past century. Self-harm is now the leading cause of death for people 15 to 49, surpassing everything else: cancers, heart disease, auto accidents. In the larger world, we've been able to turn the poverty rate around. We've been able to we've gained a lot of ground with disease, figuring out how to treat disease. We've made lots of gains in virtually every area of our national life except for one, and global life except for one, and that is suicide, because the great modern enterprise, frankly, does not work. So next are some of our myths on suicide, but we don't have time to go through those. So we're going to put all these slides will go up on our website and on Facebook page. You can read them there, but we're not going to go into them now. Next slide is also myths about suicide. And then let's go to the next slide, which says, so who does commit suicide? And we want to spend a little time here. So the first thing we see is that the people who commit suicide are people who just feel like they don't belong, who feel like they are alone. And I don't know if you see in small print it is hard to see, but we put this on every page. It's simply the statement, you are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. Every page, because we want that message to come through. Because one of the reasons that people commit suicide is because they feel alone. And for every person that succeeds in committing suicide, there's 25 that attempt it. So if there's 1 million suicides in the world, there's 25 million more who tried, so 26 million. And then that touches the lives of 125 other additional people. So for those 26 million, for every single one of them, that's times 125. You get the number of, and so you realize that, and it's much higher in affluent countries like the United States, and in countries that are still relatively primitive. Some of them have virtually no suicide rate. Some of them have no suicide rate at all. And so Brene Brown, who just released a book, In the Wilderness, and everybody should buy this book, everybody should read this book. It will likely make you angry, but if you can keep reading it even when you're angry, you will benefit greatly from it. I did. Our nation needs to read this book and take it to heart. But she writes about belonging. She often writes about belonging. And one of the things that she says about belonging is this. Even in the context of suffering, poverty, violence, human rights violations, and she takes all these things very, very seriously, and she's involved in all these things. She's, so poverty, violence, human rights violations, very, very serious. But she says, not belonging in our families is still one of the most dangerous hurts of all. So if everything a person could suffer in life, at the very top of that list is not belonging in our families. And you say, well, doesn't everybody belong in a family? Well, you may be surprised at how many people don't feel like they belong in their families. And so, for instance, one kid says, not belonging in school is really hard, but it's nothing compared to what it feels like when you don't belong at home. And what does it look like when people don't belong at home? And by the way, grandparents, I think, can have a great influence in this. I mean, I think grandparents are, in many ways, are uniquely situated to help young people navigate some of these waters. Kids actually tell us what it feels like not to belong. So these are exact words from kids. And I've heard kids say these things over and over again. One of the things they say when they don't feel they belong is when they don't live up to their parents' expectations. And I need just to take a moment and go on a rant here. So I'd say, please forgive me, but I don't think I need forgiveness for this. There's a lot of things I do, but this isn't one of them. I hope you know that GPA correlates to virtually nothing in the long term of a person's life. And where you do have correlations, they're almost always inverse. So when we start, so we just got to stop making a god out of GPA. And who ever asked you even about your GPA? I mean, once you got beyond a certain point. I mean, and do we really think that the person who graduates first in their class is better off than a person who graduated 100 points down, or even the person at the bottom of the list? And truth is, if you follow statistics and studies, and we've got great studies now, longitudinal studies, is very often this person is going to be unhappier. Because to get to here, they had to sacrifice everything. They're disconnected. All they've gone for is just this one little measure of success. And the person down here, 100 points below, or maybe even at the very bottom, that person's got a rich community of friends, and they might not get into the best school, and they might never have they might not ever have a lot of money, but they got friends, they got people around them, they know what it is to be connected, they're part of a community. And so these are going to be the people who are going to be happy in life. So we got to start worshiping things like GPA. And in Northern Virginia, you listen to conversations. I mean, I just homework. Listen for a week, and you just hear how often a conversation, you listen to kids, and how often they get the loud and clear message from their parents. And so when a kid is under this expectation that they got to have this perfect GPA, who cares about an A? I mean, really and truly, I value education more than anybody's. One of the most honest things I'll ever say to you, in many ways, I value education over faith. All right? That's how much I value education. But an A means nothing. All an A, it means something. What it means is the kid knows how to play the game. It means the kid knows how to jump through hoops. What really matters is if a kid learns, right? Is a kid connected? So stop at, and if a kid gets an A, so what? Did you enjoy the class? What did you learn in the class? Did you have some friends in the class? Because they're taking this from us. And our kids can't live with that kind of pressure, and they don't. All right, so in the soapbox, I'm off it now. That's the first one, not being as cool or popular as your parents wanted you to be, as your parents want them to be. And this is a lot more common than you think. I mean, I hear this with some frequency. And a lot of you are very cool. I get that. You still are. I wish I was as cool as you. I mean, really, I do. But I'm not even being facetious. But kids, boy, do they ever feel that. You know, boy, do they ever feel that. And now they got social media, and all social media does is reflect them back to them how uncool they are. Right? Because who measures up to all that stuff? So tremendously difficult. Not being proud, and again, these are kids saying these things. Not being good at the same things parents were good at. And you know what? We just need to give ourselves permission to own this stuff. I'm not judging you, please, I'm not judging you. This is not so we sit here with the source of shame. It's just, we need to give ourselves permission, safe space, just to own this. Because I'll guarantee you I'm guilty of these things. I can pretty well guarantee you are to some extent as well. And the only way to get beyond this is to recognize it, own it, and then make some different choices, okay? So, you know, kids, parents are embarrassed because they don't have as many friends as their parents want them to have. Or they're not an athlete. Or a cheerleader. I mean, your parents are not liking who you are and what you do. And then the last one, when your parents don't pay attention to your life. And again, you know, true confession. What parent always has time to pay attention to their kid's life? I have my own life. I have lots of things going on in my life. Sometimes that distracts me. That's why it's so important that you have other people in your kid's life other than yourself. That's why it's important your kids are in Sunday school. And this isn't institutional anything. This is just truth. It's why it's important your kids are in youth group. It's why it's important you're in church, because there's just going to be some times where parents aren't going to pay attention, and you need somebody else who's going to be in line who can pay attention when you're not. And sometimes I need attention, and sometimes my wife is distracted, and I need other people who pay attention to me when those people can't. And everything hangs in the balance on some of those things. These are things that, and then we go from kids to adults. You know, adults, right here in this room, I'll just guarantee you, probably as many of us don't feel like we belong anywhere as feel like we do. We feel like we've always been a misfit, feel like we've always been an outsider. I mean, you know, that's this feeling. And by the time you get to old age, you know, then you really feel like you don't belong anywhere. And the whole world has changed. It's not a world you recognize. And all that world does is tell you what a bad person you are, and all the mistakes you made, just shames your generation over and over and over again, calls you all kinds of names, and thinks it's okay. Well, no surprise they don't feel like they belong anymore and won't want to be a part of this world, so they check out. Who can blame them? Next one is perceived burdensomeness. Actually, it's back to the other side. Still that other one. Perceived burdensomeness. Sorry, I gave you a cue. And not as much written about this, but again, this is very, very important because a lot of people have that failed belongingness. They might think about suicide. They might attempt suicide. But it's when you get to this perceived burdenness that people succeed. And we know this from suicide notes. And so the people actually do succeed in killing themselves. In the overwhelming majority of their notes, this is one of the primary references. And it makes sense. When people believe their life really has no value anymore, then what's the point of being here? And there is some thought, and this makes a ton of sense to me, that some of this is hardwired into our DNA. Lots of animals will, in essence, commit suicide to better situate their species. So you probably don't know this, but a male lion, the head of a pride, a strong creature, if his pride is attacked by another pride of lions, in the midst of a savanna, he will actually roll over and expose his throat, in essence, commit suicide. So the other lions will kill him, and the hope is that that'll give his pride. So you get the middle-aged guy, or the older guy, and just feels like, because we've never lived in a world that does a better job of making people feel like they're unnecessary, irrelevant, unimportant, and just feel like, oh man, I am no good to anybody. And frankly, I know how that feels. And I'm not saying it's true, but I know how it feels. It's a misperception, but sometimes I'm no good to the church anymore. I can't figure any of this out. Who wants to, this last year without my dad has been such a tough year. Who wants to live with the depressed guy? I wouldn't want to live with the depressed guy. My older daughter comes home from school. Would you want to live with me? I wouldn't want to live with me. And so it just starts to feel like, and again, it's wrong. but it doesn't change the feelings. And so there's this sense of I'm a liability. I'm just not going to do that to people anymore. They're better off without me. And it's not about revenge. It's not about selfishness. It's a mistaken form of heroism. It's mistaken. It is. But that doesn't change the feeling. So we need to recognize that for what it is. And believe it or not, kids feel this too. And not as much written about this, but it's very, very true. And here's how kids feel it. It's not so much in what parents say, it's what they don't say. The stories kids tell, because kids always tell stories and they fill in the blanks. So they hear parents arguing about money. Who doesn't argue about money somewhere along the line? And the kid starts to think, boy, my parents, they have a tough time with money and I'm costing my parents a lot. They'd be better without me. It'd solve a lot of problems for my parents if I wasn't around here. They hear their parents talking about how they have to cart them all over everywhere. They don't even, how their parents don't have a life of their own because they're always taking their kid from this place to this place to this place. And the kid's thinking, I don't even want to go to these places. I'm doing this because my parents make me. And the kids know they're doing this for their parents. Their parents are doing this for their parents. They're not doing it for their kids, right? But the kid thinks, boy, my parents, they don't have any time and they seem pretty miserable. They'd be better without me. They didn't have to take me. I'm a liability. Where they hear parents fighting or not fighting, it doesn't matter if you don't fight. Kids are perceptive. You receive things through our gut, and they know when there's that kind of tension. They know, and you know the story they tell. This is my fault. My mom and dad, boy, they're having a tough time. And I think they might do better if I wasn't around. I think they'd have a happier marriage. It certainly seemed to be happier people. And so I just owe it to them. Just like the lion, roll over, show its throat. Everybody will be better. People who think that, they do it. So we need to be in tune. And last one, acquire the capability for self-harm. We don't have time to talk about that. So that's not as, when you get to that point, but we're not going to say anything about that because we don't have time. So what we're going to do in the end, and the last three things, and try and do these as quickly as I can, is we're going to look at a three-point acronym, and we can stretch out the five. It's called the 3 R's or 5 R's. And the 3 R's are you recognize the signs, you respond to the signs, and you refer. And you can fill two other R's in there. Recognize the signs, respond, remain, refer, and remove the weapon, whatever it is that's going to cause people to commit self-harm. So recognize the signs. Are there always signs? At least 80% of the cases, best statistics suggest, there are signs. There may be suicides out of the blue. I think everybody wants to make a place for being the possibility of suicides out of the blue, but most of the time that is not the case. Most of the time it'll be that people just didn't know the signs or missed the signs or whatever it may be. I can't tell you too many stories because you'll recognize details of stories and I have to change them. But for instance, I was riding with the funeral director to another funeral. They told me about a funeral that they'd just done the day before. It was a local kid who had committed suicide. And they said, no signs whatsoever. This was clean out. This kid was just excelling in everything, well-liked, no signs. Well, about 3 months afterwards, they found there were all kinds of signs. I mean, just all kinds of signs. Just people didn't know how to look for them. So maybe sometimes it does occur out of the blue, but most of the time, probably, the signs are there. We just don't know how to see them. And that's not your fault. And if that's you, that's not something to beat yourself for. You got to learn to let that go. But if it's looking into the future, we need to learn to recognize those signs. And so there's a bunch of signs there. We'll put those up. I don't have time to talk about all of them. Let me just highlight a couple real quickly that aren't up there. Somebody jokes about suicide or talks about suicide, you always follow up. I mean, always follow up. Somebody jokes about suicide, you take them aside privately and you say, listen, I don't know you that well, and I may be way out of line. If so, please forgive me. But I heard you joke about suicide in there. And in my training or my whatever, I just always want to ask somebody when they say that, are you thinking about suicide? You might say, I could never do that. That'd be too far. I'll bet you I've done that 100 times over the years. I'll bet you I've done it more than 100 times with people I don't even know. And not one single time has somebody ever said to me, how dare you? You're so pushy, with a nerve. No, every single time. Some people have deflected, right, laughed and said, oh, that was just a joke. I don't mean anything by that. And then I push a little harder, frankly. But they still don't get upset. But sometimes, more times than you might expect, people have said, yeah, I didn't know how to bring it up. I don't know how to talk about it. But yeah, I've thought about it. I've thought about it a lot. And that's a gateway into a conversation. I was in a meeting not too long ago, not here, a meeting out in the community, And a woman said, oh, I need another meeting like that, like I need a hole in the head. I'd just as soon kill myself. And literally hand signed with it. Well, we had a conversation afterwards. And in this one, she just really did hate the meeting. But that's okay. Better to follow up and find out that it was that it's not a person who's, because that's coming from somewhere, right? That's not coming out of the blue. Somewhere, she might not have been thinking about it in the moment, but there was something in there somewhere. So talking about it, changes in appearance, I mean, those are signs that are out there in front of God and everybody. And so rapid weight gains, rapid weight losses, people who are meticulous stop being meticulous, people who are always on time start being tardy, people who are really good in school start being bad in school, or people who love video games stop playing video games. Those are huge signs. And whenever you see that in somebody, it's always wise just to say, hey, look, hey, I know it's a little embarrassing, but I've noticed you've gained a lot of weight. You still look great. But is something going on? Is something going on? And I'm using this because it's a hard one, right? It's a hard one. But I have had this conversation. Again, I have never, ever, ever had anybody say, how dare you? You think I'm fat? No, I've never had anybody ever say that. But so, look, you've gained a little bit of weight. You still look great. There's something going on. And most of the time they'll say something, I'm on a new medication, this weight gain, oh, okay, that makes sense. Say, look, you really do still look great, and so many more important things to worry about. But sometimes, they drop their eyes and look at their feet, say, well, you can guess what they say. And it's an invitation to talk. So you pay attention to these things. And there's that idea that, you don't talk to people about suicide because you'll put it in their head. No, that's just not true. People want to talk about this, and when people want to talk about it, they're serious about it. It's not about attention. It's, if I said I'm going to Montana, I've made these plans, you wouldn't say, oh, you're not going to Montana. No, I'm going to Montana. So, I mean, and then the last one I'll mention, just because I've seen people get this wrong, and I think sometimes this is where some of it's coming out of the blue comes from, is there's somebody who's very, very depressed, and all of a sudden they seem like they've come through it. And all of a sudden they have this sense of well-being and euphoria, and some of you know. That's actually one of the last danger signs, because when somebody finally makes up their mind to kill themselves, when somebody finally, they have their plan in place, they have all that going on, then they get this sense of well-being and euphoria, because now there's nothing else to worry about. Now when they actually, and we know this because some people live, like people who jump off the Golden Bridge, 1 or 2% lives, and there's 4 seconds before they hit the water, and they can recount their experiences. And though they have this great sense of well-being going down those first 2 minutes, that last minute they have this unassailable fear that just hits them like a brick wall. But those moments leading up to death, there's a sense everything's settled, I'm at peace, and that's actually a danger sign. That's actually a huge danger sign. So these are some of the danger signs that go along with it. So recognize some of these signs, and there's others, you'll see them up there. Almost 100 things that you could look for, but the big ones are that isolation, that person who's feeling like they don't belong, they don't fit in, there's no place for them, the sense of being a liability or burden, I'm not effective anymore, people would be better off without me. Those are the kind of things that you're really looking for. And then respond, and that's the next slide. And you'll see a bunch of things here. Again, this will go up. I don't have time to talk about all of these things, but responding is very important. See if there's anything I want to say about responding. I just say one of those is no secrets. And I forgot to say this at other services, so this is very important. Don't ever let anybody co-opt you to secrecy. If somebody's thinking about killing themselves, other people need to know. And if it's a kid and they're living with their parents need to know. If you're a teenager, their parents need to know. And you know what? If the friendship breaks, but the kid's still alive, that's probably worth it in the end, right? So a bunch of things that we do, it's important to listen. And then remain. So we remain, we stay in the place where we stay with the person. Again, I won't go. One of the stories over the years, an older kid was out hunting, had a gun accident, and the kid survived. And it's a myth about suicide that suicide is painless. It often is not. It's often very grisly, and oftentimes people don't succeed. And so this kid didn't succeed. But when you don't succeed, for many people it's practice, and you're getting used to everything. And so they didn't take the gun away. They left the gun there, and they left the kid alone, and first chance he got, he killed himself. He got it right second time. So you recognize the signs, you respond, and we respond by assessing. And so we have this conversation. You look detached. Is anything going on? And the person says, well, I'm thinking about suicide. You say, okay, do you have a plan? Nah, I don't know. Maybe I jump from, maybe I do. Okay. You want to follow through. That person's at risk. You want to get them help, but they're probably not going to kill themselves right away. Talk to a person, you look detached. You don't seem to enjoy anything more. What's going on in your life? Thinking about killing myself. Oh, okay. I've thought about that too from time to time. Pretty normal. Have you thought about how to do it? Yeah, I've thought about how to do it. Oh, okay. How would you do it? Well, I've looked at a couple methods, but in the end, I've come down on this one. I'd use a knife. I've done my research. Heck with the risks. That's an inefficient way to go. I'm going for the carotid artery. And I know just where that is because I've been online and I know exactly how to find it. And I'm not going to cut it across this way because that doesn't work. I've researched historically, and what you do is you slice it open this way. And you go in the shower where the water's warm and the blood flows freely and it'll expedite all that. That's a very different scenario. That person, you don't leave that person alone. Maybe he laughs at that point and says, oh, I wasn't really thinking about it. I'm okay. And you say, no. And you do not leave that person alone until they get the help that they need. So that's remain, recognize, respond, remain, and then refer. People don't get to refer if you don't do your part, if I don't do my part. But we want to refer them to people who can help, and we'll give you a slide on that in just a moment. And then remove the means of suicide. If it's a gun, the person won't give up the gun, take the ammunition. If they have a key to their gun box, take the key. If they're going to drive in front of a train, take their car keys. If they're going to take medication, take their medication. Remove the means. It's incredibly effective. One last thing you can do, next slide, very quickly, is you can just be involved in the life of a church. And this, or a mosque. As it turns out, Muslims and Christians have the greatest buffers against suicide. An interesting thing. And again, this is just statistics, and I'm not going to go through them. You can read them. We'll put them up. But they're striking. So if I was a parent, and I knew I was putting things in my kid's life that I knew had to be there, but I knew these things added stress, knew worked against them, all this, I would make darn sure, and I did, that my kids, and it was no choice of theirs, that they would be actively, because kids are smart kids. When they know they don't have a choice in things, they do them. You've heard me say this a million times, brushing your teeth. And I would make sure that they're well connected, because that's one of the single best buffers. That's one of the single best ways you can ensure your kids stay alive. And no parent thinks that their kid is going to be the one that doesn't do that. Okay. So, last slide. And I want everybody to do this, okay? So please take out your phone. And even if you think this isn't necessary for you, it might be necessary for the person next to you, and they might feel embarrassed doing this if you don't take out your phone. So everybody, please take out your phone. And because everybody has their phone, hold them up when you have it out. And we should see virtually everybody with their hand. And I don't normally put people on the spot like this. I'm not normally this forward, but this one we're going to be forward. So phones out, hands up. And I want you to take a picture of this slide. All right, I want to take a picture of this slide. You also have these resources in your bulletin, and you might think this isn't necessary because you might not know anybody who's thinking about committing suicide. You might not be thinking about committing, but you might find yourself in the next week, in the next year, with somebody who's having this talk. You think, what do I do? Well, you'll have your phone with you. Pull out your phone. You know exactly what to do. So you call one of these numbers, and so you have this resource. So we want everybody to have this resource. Last thing is just one of the things I did in one of the courses we studied suicide notes, looked at suicide notes. One of the suicide notes was left by a guy who was going to was intending to commit suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And his note was very simple. He said, I'm going to commit suicide by jumping off the bridge if just one person smiles at me. One person. All they have to do is smile. If just one person smiles at me, I won't do it. He jumped. Sometimes, something as simple as smiling at a stranger is the difference between life and death. And that is why, for me, it really is my mission in life, is to encourage us to be good to one another. It is not an academic exercise. You can't do what I do, see so much pain day in and day out, and not realize how much the way we treat each other matters. So church, be the church. Listen to people. Care about people. Talk about people. Be involved with people. Treat each other well. Be good to each other. Be good to every cotton-picking person you meet, because it just might be the difference between life and death. Amen.